Nadine Flood, welcome to News 24.
Thanks.
If the government has to find savings, why is it wrong for the government to look at its own areas of spending, at its own workforce, at the public service to get some savings?
It's not necessarily wrong. The problem is this is another cut on top of cuts earlier this year, last year and the years before. The public service isn't a magic pudding. You can't keep cutting billions of dollars and say that that won't impact on jobs and services. It just doesn't add up.
But the government says there are ways of finding the money without necessarily having an impact on jobs. Some of those are driven by new technology, for example, replacing travel with more teleconferencing. As those things become available, surely it's then up to the government to say, well, we don't need to spend as much on travel when we can do other things.
Well, certainly government should be looking at ways of delivering services better, but the reality is that 70% of agencies' expenditure is on staff in frontline services. And what that means is if you cut $1.5 billion, you will lose jobs. I haven't seen a lot of Centrelink and Medicare workers at the airport recently. You know, travel may work for government to an extent, but it's not actually going to stop there being cuts to jobs and cuts to services.
How many jobs do you think are at risk?
Our best analysis says that up to 3,000 jobs could go as a result of these cuts, and that will have a significant impact in communities around Australia, particularly in those frontline areas, but also in areas such as border protection.
The government has quarantined some areas from the increased efficiency dividend, including cultural institutions, including the courts and some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations. It's not necessarily the case, is it, that the cuts will fall in frontline services?
Well, the areas they've quarantined, that is a positive to an extent. Those are areas that we have advocated for have been hit harder by the existing efficiency dividend, and certainly there are areas that cannot afford any more cuts. But what that does mean is that these cuts will affect frontline service delivery agencies, and that will have a significant impact.
The government no doubt would have had the choice of spreading the pain wider across the community. Do you think it's in its political interest to quarantine this pain to the public service, given that the rest of Australia doesn't necessarily always have the highest opinion of public servants?
Well, in fact, I think the government is out of step with the community. Essential polling released yesterday shows 71% of Australians would prefer delaying a return to a budget surplus than cutting essential services and investment in infrastructure. There is actually strong community support for these services.
The government did promise at the time of the last election it would not increase the efficiency dividend. It's now done so twice. What do you think of that election promise?
Oh, look, I think, it's a decision that it's the wrong call, it's a bad decision, but it's not great for the government's credibility. I think it will be very difficult for government to credibly say that they support public sector spending when they keep making these decisions when the times get tough.
Do you think there's a cut that could be made to the public service that would be achievable but do less damage?
We've done a lot of work with federal government agencies to achieve savings and to actually deliver productivity improvements. Those things go on all the time, but you can't deal with an increasing population, with increasing demand for government services and pretend that you can keep doing that with less money. It just doesn't make sense.
You're opposed to these cuts. What do you intend to do about them?
Well, firstly, we'll be talking to our members, we'll be advocating in every community around Australia and identifying exactly what impact these cuts have. We'll be talking to members of Parliament and people in the community about what that looks like. At the same time, obviously, we've got to protect our members' jobs and ensure that employees can actually keep jobs in the public service, move between agencies and so on. But we will hold government accountable for every reduction in jobs and services that comes as a result of these cuts.
Is there a prospect of industrial action by your members, but also of lobbying the minor parties and the independents in the Parliament to vote against these cuts?
Well, of course, like all employees, public servants only have limited access to industrial action, and for the majority of public servants, that's not something that they could actually legally do. It's not something we foresee at this time. There is a political debate to have with the major parties and the minor parties about actually being prepared to say to the community, if you support the essential services, you also are going to need to pay for them. Government can tighten its belt, but it can't keep doing more with less forever.
Nadine Flood, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.